The sound of hasty steps, a harsh whistle, a muffled whimper, and all kinds of cries for help were heard throughout the hospital emergency. "Mr. Chairman, we found Dr. Bennett," a man in a black suit breathlessly reported to Carl Miller, the chairman of the board for a leading financial. "What about our people?" replied Carl, eagerly grasping his subordinate's arm as he demanded further updates. His hold was so strong the man could not help but. "Everything's in place," the man replied. Hearing the answers he needed, Carl relaxed his hold slightly before he could figure out whether he should be surprised or feel guilty. Dr. Victoria Bennett, the best surgeon of the 27th century. Carl saw that Victoria was wearing her trademark white coat, but he also noticed her sparkling, glamorous, 4-inch high-heeled shoes and knew exactly which social gathering she had been pulled. She walked past him to see her patient, Sonia, who used to be Carl's fiancée, but then married another man to help her family. That man was currently in the recovery. The assistant doctor spoke up. "Dr. Bennett, this is Sonia, 23 years old, 5'4", 121 pounds. No history of smoking or alcoholism. No known allergies, and no major surgery within the last year. The sustained injury was in the heart. The bullet traveled through her clothing and accessories and entered the right atrium." While listening to the assistant doctor brief her on the patient's injury, Victoria was already putting on her surgicals. "Only in the right atrium. You couldn't have fixed that yourself," Victoria replied with a careless tone, which was quite different from her usual dedicated work. The assistant doctor awkwardly rubbed his chin and said, "Sorry, doctor, the bullet is too close to the aortic arch. None of the surgeons on shift dared to touch it, so they asked us to call you." Victoria looked at one of the attending doctors nearby with an inquisitive expression, but he didn't say anything and tried to avoid her gaze. Feeling very intimidated, the assistant swallowed and said, "The chairman specifically asked for you to do the operation, and no one could overrule." Victoria sneered and strode into the operating room, where 5 assistants were ready. There was a lack of equipment and surgical instruments, but this wasn't too much of a. Everyone knew that Mary carries all the medical equipment, because she is the only one who has 7 medical space carriers in. When Victoria focused her mind on the equipment she needed, the digital medical space device attached to the inner side of her wrist instantly sent out a cold green light. At once, there were all kinds of surgical instruments and consumables where the light had. No fewer than 10 million people had been selected to integrate with the medical space over many years, and only 7 had survived. Using the extensive equipment store, most of the operation went smoothly for Victoria. The repair to this degree of injury was as simple as chopping vegetables. However, when Sonia's condition was stable and they were nearing the end of the procedure, a bloody scalpel suddenly pierced Victoria. She looked in disbelief at the assistant doctor who had reported Sonia's condition to her earlier, who had been working with her for 5 years. She gasped out one word: "Why?" The assistant doctor said, "The chairman has ordered that Ms. Sonia can't leave." Victoria was speechless and was beginning to feel faint. Before she lost consciousness, she heard the assistant's final words to her. "She can't leave. I need to kill. These disturbing words were the last thing Victoria heard before she died. There was a dark irony in the fact that was a master surgeon, and she had died under her own scalpel. She had always thought that death was the end, like the lights just going out, so she would never have expected that there was an even bigger surprise waiting. The strong sense of weightlessness made the unconscious Victoria wake up suddenly from the... When she opened her eyes, she could see the blue sky. A bizarre idea popped up in her mind. Is this hell? At least the environment is doing better here. There was no blue sky in the 27th. However, this ridiculous thought was gone in a flash. Victoria soon realized that she was falling rapidly, and her face hurt from the cold wind in her ear. She was totally powerless to resist her. "Ahow!" she screamed out, just as she fell to the ground with a bang. But she questioned if she was really on the ground. Why is this ground so soft? Landing didn't hurt at all, it's just sticky. She opened her eyes slowly and saw a terrible sight. If she hadn't been a surgeon for many years and had friends working in forensics, she would have been scared. What she saw seemed to be a statue of a man completely covered in blood. Not only that, but his open eyes were red and looking at her. He looked like a dead man who had been... Victoria tentatively reached out to touch the palm of the figure's hand. It was sticky, so she quickly pulled back, even though she was not surprised to see the blood covering his hand. Her mind spun for a moment, and she realized that she must have fallen into the figure's arms. Feeling a chill, she pulled away from him and left. But as she tried, she felt the man holding onto her. Wait, he's alive, she wondered in shock. "Hold me," he said in a low, hoarse voice. Victoria felt a cold sweat on her body from the utter shock of her She was stiff and didn't dare to move. But the bloody man, seemingly dissatisfied with her reaction, tightened his hold, digging into the flesh on her. He gurgled, "Wait. Don't let me go." Victoria felt a wave of nausea as her hands hooked around the bloody man's neck. But the body was still stiff, so she was only able to pull him ashore. The bloody man's breathing was short, and he seemed to be trying his best to bear the pain. With Victoria's palm resting on his skin, his breathing settled. However, this alone didn't satisfy his body's desire. "Hold on tight," he said. Victoria looked at him blankly and thought, is this bloody man trying to get some kind of thrill? He's a body of sticky blood. Who wants me to hold him? When Victoria didn't respond to his request, the bloody man squeezed her waist even. Using all the strength he had, he pinched the soft part of her waist, which made her throw her arms up and... "That's enough. Let go," she exclaimed. Feeling the hold on her waist relax, Victoria propped herself up and shifted to a less awkward position. Slipping her arms around the bloody man's neck, she cradled his head and hugged him. The bloody man's body shook for a while. He hadn't expected that the woman who had fallen from the sky would really be bold enough to hug him. With his chin pressed into her neck, the bloody man noticed a scent like the cool breath of mint leaves and the sweet smell of gardenia. His lips glided over the delicate skin of her neck, building up a warm feeling in his heart, as if the flesh under his mouth was not a person's skin at all, but a delicious soft candy, which made him want to taste. After a few moments, he could no longer suppress the impulse to open his mouth. He opened his thin lips to try to gently suck Victoria's neck, but he didn't have the strength, and all he could do was to stick out his tongue and lick her. However, with this kind of intimate embrace, the stiffness of the bloody man's body began to gradually ease, and his pain also slowly. Just when he felt that he could move his body a little, he suddenly felt a slight stabbing pain in it. After the pain passed, there was an overwhelming dizziness. In his hazy awareness, the bloody man heard Victoria's words. "You were going to bite me, weren't you? But luckily, I'm smart enough not to let you. It doesn't matter if you're a human or a ghost or whatever, you need to back off. I have no time for you." When he finally slumped motionless back to the ground, Victoria stood up and breathed a sigh of relief. She bent down to adjust him into a slightly more comfortable position and to remove the tranquilizer injector that she had summoned from the medical space and plunged into him. Fortunately, the tranquilizer had worked on this monster who seemed to want to eat. She couldn't figure out what was wrong with the bloody man. A scan using medical space equipment gave no hints and didn't indicate any specific injuries. So why was his whole body one big bloody mass? Could it be some kind of zombie infection that's contagious through? At the thought of all this, Victoria couldn't help shivering in disgust. She quickly ran away from the prone bloody. A half hour later, two strong men dressed in black came looking for the bloody man. A half hour later, two strong men dressed in black came looking for the bloody man, bringing clean clothes and a handkerchief with them. They were shocked to see that he was "Our Lord!" cried one of them, Arthur, as they both rushed over to him. He started reaching out his hand toward the bloody man's face to check for signs of. However, before he could get close enough to check for sure, Arthur felt a tight pressure on his other wrist. He looked down to see that the bloody man was gripping him. "My lord, how can you move? How are you doing this?" Kurt, the other man in black, quickly reached out to help. The bloody man waved his hand and refused the help of his bodyguards. He sat up and crossed his legs as a layer of white fog appeared on his body. The two dark guards stepped back quickly as the white fog attached to the bloody body's surface. A few moments later, the blood stains on the body began to condense into ice. After the body froze into an icy mass, the bloody ice began to split off in chunks, one by one, revealing normals. After waiting for his whole body to clear the ice, the man took the handkerchief from Kurt's hand and wiped away the final shards of broken ice left on his. The action finally revealed his beautiful face, which looked as if it had been carved by an angel. The blood-red color in his eyes had also disappeared, and his normal eyes were dark and. "Don't fuss, nothing is wrong with me," exclaimed the man, who now looked his true self again. He was Charles Archibald, a king of the Archibald dynasty. "Lord, how can you move?" Kurt asked. He was confused because normally, the attack of the blood curse began at midnight and ended at noon. But he realized it didn't seem to be the right time to worry. He has a point, though. How can I move? Charles thought as he recalled the bold woman who fell from the sky into his arms. He didn't understand why he had been able to move when he met her. At first, he could only move his fingers. But when she held him in her arms, he had felt some of his strength beginning to return. The feeling of pain had also greatly. Who is she? How is she able to alleviate the effects of the blood curse? A woman fell into my arms, and she was the one who knocked me out. We need to find her, he exclaimed with a commanding expression. But he was concerned he wouldn't see the woman again anytime soon. After running to what felt like a safe distance, Victoria slowed her pace and began to think about all the details of her entanglement with the bloody man. But the more she reviewed the information running through her mind, the more confused she became.